Hello. So for today's video, I'm going to do a little try-on haul of different Halloween costumes that I have. This year, I'm not going to be able to go to any like Halloween events or go to any Halloween parties because I just got a new puppy. She's very, very tiny and so cute, but I can't leave her alone. Yeah, she's too little. So this year I'm just gonna be, not really partaking in Halloween festivities, but I still wanted to get into the Halloween spirit. So I thought, for this video it might be fun just to show off some of my favorite costumes that I have. Just kind of make some sounds and just talk in a sort of soft-spoken way. However, disclaimer, this video is not gonna be like a traditional ASMR video. So I just want you to consider yourself forewarned. Because I actually feel like I just want to have like a heart-to-heart. I'm going to have the heart-to-heart while I change costumes. But I sort of want to just connect, if you don't mind. I've realized recently that, oftentimes when I'm in a crowd, in a social situation, the conversations that are taking place aren't really the conversations that I myself find myself, drawn to and interested in. So I thought maybe we could have like a little bit of a conversation that's like a little bit off the beaten path. Because maybe you feel that way as well. Maybe you feel a little bit bored with talking about just the same types of topics over and over and over again because they're the topics that are considered safe and normal and everybody has them. But sometimes it's fun just to get a little weird. So that's what we're gonna do. We're gonna get a little weird. So this is something that I was thinking about this morning and I thought I would share it with you. So I live in Los Angeles, and unfortunately in Los Angeles there's a bit of like a mental health crisis. There's a big homeless population. So I was at the park yesterday, and while I was at the park walking around, because I like to go there pretty often, and it really helps me personally to clear my head. Just walking in nature and being in the sunshine. I feel like that's something that's so important for mental health. But while I was at the park, there was this man that was there. He was sitting under a tree, and he was obviously, schizophrenic. He was having a full-on, very argumentative conversation, with someone that I myself could not perceive to be there. And the reason I say I myself could not perceive to be there and not someone who wasn't there is because I believe that, what we perceive to be reality is quite fluid. So let me just start off by saying, what if I told you that what we see, like the visible spectrum of light that human beings like ourselves are able to perceive, is not even 1%, of what's actually there. So what we perceive is 0.00, I don't know if this is going to be backwards for you, but 0.0035% of what is actually in existence. sense. So, we can't see so many different types of light and frequencies. So essentially we're blind. I think if someone told you that you're only able to see 0.0035% of what's there, you would, kind of effectively be able to agree we are blind. But that's not even the worst part. That's actually pretty good when you think about the frequencies that we are able to actually hear. So we are only able to hear point and then like 10 or 11 zeros. I forget how many. Let's say like point 10 or 11 zeros, and then there's a 2 or something at the end. That's how much we are able to actually hear. So it's safe to say we barely see anything that's actually here, and we barely hear anything that's actually here. So essentially, so much of what actually exists is completely invisible and completely hidden from us. So based on that, don't you think it's a little arrogant for us to say that someone that's having what we call a visual or auditory hallucination is actually hearing or seeing something that doesn't exist? Or perhaps it's just at a frequency that most of us are unable to. Hear me out. So, when we're kids, oftentimes, we'll have an imaginary friend, and we'll talk to that person, and our family just thinks it's cute, and nobody says like, oh, that child is insane. It's just accepted that, that's just something that children do. So what if I told you that the part of the brain, the thalamus, the part of the brain in children that makes it, possible for them to have these imaginary friends, that part of the brain is the same in people that have schizophrenia. And that maybe, perhaps, this part of our brain that for most of us eventually changes as we get older. What if people who develop schizophrenia simply are able to see and hear more of what is actually in existence because their brains developed differently than ours? What if? What if instead of being broken, what if they actually are able to tap into frequencies that most of us are unable to see and hear? So, recent studies have shown that the brain is actually not what is producing our consciousness. Our brain is like a radio tower, and it picks up the frequencies that are out there in the world. So think about it right now. In your room, wherever you are right now, there are radio signals all throughout the air that you can't see. And if you were to turn on a radio right now, that device would pick them up, and by turning the dial, you would hear different songs. And those frequencies are just buzzing all around you right now. But your ears are not able to hear them. They need the device, the radio, in order to hear them. So what if our brains are like that? What if our brains are just these devices that filter through various frequencies, only a very, very, very small amount. And then we call the people that are able to see and hear more than the average person. We call those people crazy. Or we call those people broken. Or we call those people defective. So think about what that would do to you if, like, let's just say your mother, your father, your sister, your best friend, someone that you consider to be a trustworthy, close confidant. What if, at some point, collectively the entire world told you that person that you see that looks completely 100% real to you? What if the whole world collectively told you that person, they don't exist, and you're broken? What's interesting to know is that a lot of schizophrenic people that hallucinate, the things that they initially see can appear to them as friends, confidants, mentors, leaders. However, over years of being told that those people do not exist, they obviously start to develop an antagonistic relationship with that person, which any of us would have. So imagine if there was a person in your life that everyone told you they're not real. Wouldn't you start to be sort of angry when they showed up? Wouldn't you get to a point where you didn't want them to speak to you? And wouldn't you feel so alone and so confused if you were the only person that was able to perceive this person? And so what I would love to see personally in mental health, I would love to see a time, some point in the future, where instead of treating people with mental illnesses as if they're broken in some sort of way, but instead we treated them as having a highly tuned, like radio antenna, essentially, that is able to perceive frequencies that the typical brain is not able to perceive. And what if instead of just medicating them, what if we actually started to teach them how to learn how to communicate with the things that they see and hear? And what if we actually were able to learn something from them instead of just discarding them, instead of just turning them into outcasts, instead of just over-medicating them to the point where they just feel like walking zombies? What if they actually had something very, very important to say? You know, what we think of as normal and what we think of as crazy is so easily manipulated. And there's been so many studies on this. There was this case, I can't remember the specific name of the person. I majored in psychology, so this is like something that's, personally like super interesting to me. And I volunteered at a crisis hotline when I was in college and actually spoke on the phone to people that, were suffering from some of these things that I'm talking about right now. And the reason I didn't end up going into the mental health field is because I actually felt that the way that we view things is completely wrong. And I didn't want to be a part of that system. But, so the study I was talking about, there was this man, I can't remember what his name was, and I can't remember the crime that he committed. But he committed some crime, and he realized that if he pleaded insanity, he would be able to, be sent to a mental health facility as opposed to going to jail. And at the time, he thought that was the better of the two options. So what this man did was he pretended to be crazy in order to get, sent to the sanitarium. However, he faked it. He faked it a little too well. And at the time I was reading about this, he had been in the sanitarium for 12 years. And had he gone to jail, he probably would have only been there for around 5. And what he realized in interviews, because people have done interviews with this man, is that it's almost impossible to convince people that you're sane once they've labeled you as crazy. Everything that he said to try to convince them that he had just faked these things just ended up being further proof to them that he was insane. And at the time that I was reading about this, he was still there. And the people that went and tried to speak on his behalf and explain that, they knew him and he was just faking this, they would say to them, that's all just, signs of a narcissistic personality, and that he's just a classic narcissist and sociopath, and he's just convinced them, of these things, and these are all attributes of narcissistic sociopaths. And so he was trapped there. So it's just kind of using that as an example to show that, what we perceive to be normal and what we perceive to be crazy is a very fine line in between it. And there was a lot of other studies also where they would send people to, let's say, a sanitarium, and they would tell the nurses and the staff, okay, we are going to put 5 people in that are completely sane, and you're going to have to try to guess which ones they are. And most of the times, if not all of the time, they had no idea. And they usually would pick the wrong people. And sometimes there wouldn't even be anybody in the group, and they would still tell them that there was. And they wouldn't, they would have all these ideas and theories, and it's just, psychology is such a pseudoscience, and it's actually pretty dangerous in my opinion. All right, so I'm gonna change costumes soon and change topics. I thought the nurse costume, kind of lent itself to having a discussion about mental health. But before we switch gears, this nurse costume reminds me of that Pink Floyd song, Comfortably Numb. So I've always been someone that really never listened to the music of my own generation. So when I was in high school, I was really obsessed with Pink Floyd. I mean, their lyrics are just really incredible. Between Pink Floyd and Leonard Cohen, which were the 2 main things I listened to in high school, it really influenced me in my own writing style. But I just kind of wanted to recite a little bit of the song, Comfortably Numb, because I think it really kind of is a good example of what's currently going on with mental health, and how all these sort of charlatans, I guess you could say, are just over-medicating people and trying to convince them that they need to be on certain substances in order to be fixed and normal. So in the song Comfortably Numb, it's kind of like two different perspectives. Some of the song is from the perspective of a like nurse or doctor speaking to, I'm assuming, Roger Waters. And then some of the song is from the perspective of him speaking back to the nurse. So we'll start off with what the nurse is saying to him. So the nurse comes in and she says, "You'll be the patient. Hello, hello, hello. Is there anybody in there? Just nod if you can hear me. Is there anyone home? Relax, relax, relax. I just need some information first. Just the basic facts. Can you show me where it hurts?" So after that voice says that part, a different voice, that's David Gilmour, then he comes in and says something different in response to that voice, which I think is kind of like your higher self speaking back to the doctors. And he says, "There is no pain. You are receding. A distant ship smoke on the horizon. You are only coming through in waves. Your lips move, but I can't hear what you're saying. When I was a child, I had a fever. My hands felt just like two balloons. Now I've got that feeling. Once again, I cannot explain. You wouldn't understand. This is not how I am. I have become comfortably numb." And then the nurse comes back with a syringe and she says, "Okay, okay, okay. Just a little pinprick. There will be no more. But you may feel a little sick. Can you stand up, stand up, stand up? I do believe it's working. Good. That'll keep you going for the show. Come on, it's time to go." And then, he answers back with saying, "There is no pain. You are receding. A distant ship smoke on the horizon. You are only coming through in waves. Your lips move, but I can't hear what you say." When I was a child, I caught a fleeting glimpse out of the corner of my eye. I turned to look, but it was gone. I cannot put my finger on it now. The child is gone. The dream is gone. I have become comfortably numb. I don't know, I just feel like that song sort of describes a lot of sort of like how a lot of us are feeling right now. Like the world is just so insane that we have to sort of numb ourselves to it. And then these people disguised as, helpers are just trying to come in and just, give us all these things to hide what we're feeling. But I believe that our feelings are actually sort of like the guides to helping us get back on the correct course, and that it's not actually beneficial to just medicate them away. But that's just my thoughts on it. Who am I to say? All right, I'm going to change costumes. Alright, so I've changed costumes. Now I thought I would discuss something that's a little bit more science-based in this little skeleton costume. So another thing that I think about quite frequently is, why we're here. What is like the purpose to all of us? And, I was reading about something recently that sort of transformed. I'm just realizing I have a little bit of makeup on my hand. Just side note, that's how I do my makeup. I put it on my hand and then I put it on my face. But anyways, I digress. So I was reading something recently that was talking about, how billions of years ago, when the planet was first, in its very first stages, there were these single-celled organisms, these bacteria. And what they did is they completely transformed the entire planet into the version that we see today. But what really was kind of like this light bulb moment for me was, so here we have these little tiny, insignificant bacteria. And their sole purpose was that they were slowly, over the period of billions of years, they were taking carbon dioxide, which is, not suitable for us, and they were transforming it through photosynthesis into oxygen. And over the course of billions of years, that transformation, resulted in, the ozone layer forming and oxygen levels being transformed, and then more complex forms of life coming about. So none of that ever would have been able to happen if it were not for these simple little bacteria. And that sort of made me think. So say, what if, hypothetically, we were able to have talked to those bacteria? There was a way of communicating with them. And we were able to have asked them, what was your purpose? Why are you here? Do you think they would have been able to realize everything that came as a result from them just existing? No, they would have been completely incapable of realizing, just through their mere existence, this entire world and all these things that came to be as a direct result from them just being themselves and just doing naturally, what they were meant to do. And I thought, what if that is similar to what our purpose is? What if just by our mere existence, what if just by being ourselves, just by being the most true, authentic forms of ourselves, what if through just doing that, we were able to change the world? And it kind of made me think, what if, hypothetically, by becoming the most authentic, purest forms of ourselves, by disregarding everything that society and culture and the world, tries to throw on us, and all these things that take us away from our true purpose, our true reason from being here, and put us on this false path. What if we rejected all of that? And our main focus just became self-discovery, the discovery of who we truly are, not by adding more to ourselves, but by taking away all the falseness that we've been sort of forced to think is what makes us who we truly are. And what if in that process of becoming of becoming the truest, purest versions of ourselves, if that changed our vibrational frequency, and at the end of the day, like, everything is vibration, everything is frequency. And so say, what if collectively, globally, there's like this mass movement where everyone changes their sort of like vibrational level, and like our consciousness evolves to such a point where it literally starts to transform the very nature of existence and of this planet. And perhaps like the next movement, it won't be like a political movement. Perhaps the next major movement needs to be something of actually coming together in a unification. Because when you think about like the collective unconscious, when you think about, this phenomenon that can happen where people at completely opposite ends of the world will simultaneously come up with like the same inventions, the same theories, and they'll say that their major breakthroughs often come to them like when they're sleeping, or like in that state when like they've just first woken up, or they're just about to fall asleep, and they're able to sort of like tap into this form of knowing, and they're starting to realize that this exists in the animal world, this exists in plants. Trees are able to communicate with each other like almost simultaneously if they're infected with some sort of insect. They'll be able to send a message to the trees that are nearby them and able to tell them how to change like the enzymes that are inside their leaves and whatnot in order to make them non-desirable to these insects so that they won't be attacked. And they've shown studies where they've trained rats how to do specific mazes, let's say in New York, just throwing out an area. And once these rats have mastered these mazes, and then they present those mazes to rats that have never seen this maze before, rats that are completely on a different coast, those rats will have a better time and they'll figure out the maze quicker than the ones that had seen it originally, as if some sort of knowledge was able to be retained and spread throughout this like collective unconscious. So let's just say, hypothetically, that there is a way to tap into that. And they've even recently done studies for the first time, and you can Google this, where they've been able to have two people that are dreaming lucidly. I don't know if you know what lucid dreaming is, but that's when you're asleep, but you're conscious that you're asleep and you're able to interact with the things that are going on in your dreams. So they were able to, for the very first time in a study, they were able to give one lucid dreamer a specific word, and that person was able to transcribe or give that word to another lucid dreamer, and they were able to prove that there is a way to communicate with people on a different plane of existence. So based on the fact that we're seeing all of these things starting to happen, and we're starting to realize that consciousness doesn't originate in our brain, but it's something that we're all able to tap into. It's like a field. What if we could change the vibration of that field? And what if collectively we all start to realize that, insects like bees and ants and, things like trees and tomato plants and whatnot, they're all able to communicate with each other in a seemingly almost telepathic sort of way. If they are able to achieve that level, then what is stopping us from being able to achieve that? And that perhaps, when Jesus was talking about the kingdom of heaven is among you, the kingdom of heaven is within you. Maybe he actually meant that literally. And what if the exact world that we want to inhabit, the exact place that we want to exist within, is just merely the difference of changing, like the vibrational frequency, shifting our perception, altering our own reality to see the things that we've been, not tuning into by only looking at that less than 1%, by only hearing that less than 1%. And what if we started training ourselves to seeing the reality, even if it was still only like 2%? What if we raised it up and we began to see how everything is connected and we are all one, and that we're not actually divided? And what if we started to really realize how powerful we actually are? And what if we stopped believing them when they tell us how divided we are? And what if we stopped believing them when they tried to plant all these ideas in our heads that just lead to anger and fighting? And what if we start a complete revolution of thought and of being and of existence? And what if we transform the entire planet? If those single-celled little bacteria were able to change the entire course of existence, then think about what we could be capable of if we set our minds to it, and if we came together, and if we stopped working against each other. Think about what could be possible. I don't know, it's just a thought. What do I know? Well, thank you for listening to my little version of an ASMR TED Talk. I'd be curious to hear any of your thoughts on this, if you agree with any of it or think I'm just completely out of my mind. I'm totally open to obviously being 100% wrong about everything that I've said, but I think that it's important to have these kinds of conversations with each other. And like the older I get, the more bored I am with just meaningless, like small talk, and like these are the types of conversations that I personally crave. So hopefully someone else just enjoyed listening to some ideas and connecting on a level that was a little less superficial. I hope that you have an amazing day and an amazing week, and I hope that you remember how powerful you are. And if I was to give one piece of advice, I would say that be aware of how you speak to yourself. Always try to speak to yourself in a really positive way. I know that sounds just sort of cheesy, but it's pretty transformational. And it's truly where transformation really begins and where it first takes root. The thoughts that you think really have a complete direct correlation on like the experiences that you have and the actions that you take. Everything starts, inside you, and then that produces the world that you live in. And so try an experiment where you really start trying to think highly of yourself. And even if you're not exactly happy with the place that you're in right in this exact moment, try to speak in a way that sends the message to your body that you're working towards that. Always say, I am becoming the best version of myself. Every day I am getting closer to being the best version of myself. And just always speak to yourself in a way that's very loving and kind. You'll be shocked at the results you have when you start catching the way that you speak to yourself and changing it. And it'll really transform you from the inside out if you can change that tape. And you can change the tape that you play yourself in terms of how you feel the world perceives you and how you perceive the world. You can really start to create your own perception of reality based on how you think. Just try it out. It's a little experiment. Got nothing to lose. All right, so that's that. And see you in the next video.